She needs a couple minutes, I think.
Oh, with for the.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. It is now 11:34 a.m. and I'm calling the special board meeting of May 2nd, 2023, scheduled for 11:30 a.m. to order. We'll go to item 2A, certification of required hours of continuing education for board members, and I will read the following. Under the State Board of Education rule, completing required continuing education each year of service is a basic obligation and expectation of any sitting board member. As board president, I am required to announce the name of each member who has completed the requiring continuing education, has exceeded the required continuing education, and is deficient in meeting the required continuing education. The requirements for training are measured as of the first anniversary of the date of the trustee's election or appointment, or 2-year anniversary of his or her previous training is applicable. There are 7 training areas for board member continuing education. 1, local district orientation. 2, orientation to the Texas Education Code. 3, post-legislative update to the Texas Education Code. 4, team building. 5, additional continuing education. 6, evaluating student academic performance and setting goals. 7, identifying and reporting abuse, trafficking, and other maltreatment of children. To the extent applicable to each board member, I will announce the completion or deficiency as to required training. For members who still have time remaining to complete required training, I will announce those board members who have scheduled timely training and those who have not yet scheduled the training. At the conclusion of this announcement, I will announce any board members' training in excess of the continuing education requirements. I further note that Trustee Freddie Clael-Avalos resigned from the Board of Trustees as of the date of October 12, 2022, and discontinued participating in district events or trustee training after this date. Local district orientation. The following board members completed the first year local district orientation training: Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, and Israel Iraboli. Orientation to the Texas Education Code. The following board members completed the first year orientation to the Texas Education Code training: Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, and Israel Iraboli. Post-legislative update to the Texas Education Code. The following board members completed the post-legislative update to the Texas Education Code: Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Iraboli, Freddie Clael-Avalos, and Al Velarde. Team building. The following board members completed the annual team building training: Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Iraboli, and Al Velarde. Freddie Clael-Avalos completed the required team building requirements for 2021-2022 reporting period, however, is deficient for the 2022-2023 reporting period. Additional continued education. The following board members completed the additional continuing education requirements: Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Irabali, Freddie Clael-Avalos, and Al Velarde. Evaluating student academic performance and setting goals. The following board members completed the biennial training on evaluating student academic performance and setting goals. Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Irabali, and Al Velarde. Freddie Clael-Avalos completed this biannual requirement in 2021. However, the renewal date for this training was March 2023, therefore is deficient. Identifying and reporting abuse, trafficking, and other maltreatment of children. The following board members completed the biennial training on identifying and reporting abuse, trafficking, and other maltreatment of children. Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Irabali, and Al Velarde. Freddie Clael-Avalos completed this biennial requirement in 2021. However, the renewal date for this training was January 2023, therefore is deficient. School safety. The board members completed the biennial training of school safety. Josh Acevedo, Daniel Call, Leah Hanani, Isabel Hernandez, Israel Irabali, Freddie Clael-Avalos, and Al Velarde. For this reporting period, May 2021 to April 2023, board member Josh Acevedo exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 13.25 additional hours. Board member Daniel Call exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 17 additional hours. Board member Leah Hanani exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 12.5 additional hours. Board member Isabel Hernandez exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 42.25 additional hours. Board member Israel Irabali exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 19.25 additional hours. Board member Al Velarde exceeded the required amount of continuing education training by 70.5 additional hours. Do we have a motion? Motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Not in favor? Motion carries 6-0. We will now go to item 3, 3A.
I don't think there's 6 people on the dais.
We have
Okay.
5.
We have 5. My mistake. It's approved by 5 people. Thank you, Ms. Hanani. Item 3A, approval to award curriculum materials and associated professional development, RFP number 23-087, administrative recommendation, Accelerate Learning, Inc., Age of Learning, Inc., Amplify Education, Inc., Attainment Company, Inc., Brain, POP, LLC, Carnegie Learning, Inc., Crabtree Publishing Company, Teachers Discovery, Inc., ECS Learning Systems, EPS Operations, LLC, Great Minds, PBC, iStation, Cameco Instructional Media, Inc., Khan Academy, Nosies Educational Services, McGraw-Hill School Education, Mind Education, N2Y LLC, NS4 Ed LLC, NWEA, Pacific Learning, Perfection Learning Corporation, QEP Professional Books, Red Comet, Savas Learning Company LLC, Schools PLP, Studies Weekly Inc., Sunrise Virtual Reality, Teacher Created Materials, College Board, Thinking Nation Corp., Certified Education Consultants Inc., DBA Writing by Design, and ZERN. Budget, federal, state, and local funds, $15 million.
We have 2 speakers to this item.
Okay, we have 2 speakers. Ms. Hanani, if you'll go ahead and introduce the speaker, please, and the statement.
The district is a local government body charged with serving the educational needs of all school children in our district, and board meetings must be focused on meeting this charge. In meeting that charge, the district board meetings are public meetings under the Texas Open Meetings Act to conduct the business of the district. They are not, however, meetings of the public. Therefore, all persons in attendance are expected to display civility and decorum, that is, respect for other persons, without the use of insulting, profane, threatening, or abusive language. Public comment will not be used for personal attacks. In addition, you are directed to the district's complaint procedures and board policy regarding employee, student, parent, or public complaints. The Deputy Superintendent of Administration is in attendance if you wish to discuss a matter with him. Please note that during public forums, specific factual information or recitation of existing policy may be furnished in response to inquiries. However, the board may not deliberate or decide any subject that is not posted on its agenda. Our first speaker is Mr. Ross Moore. And please note that we don't have the timer working today. I'll be timing you manually.
Board President Velarde, board members, Messiah Vader, my name is Ross Moore, President El Paso AFT. This should take less than 3 minutes. Do we all agree reading is important and a core life skill? I hope so. You're about to approve $15 million of spending on curriculum. That's a lot of money that's going to be spent. In the area of reading, is it going to be well spent or wasted and in the process continue students that you are responsible for semi-literate best? Here's the short version. 65% of fourth graders in this country are not proficient readers. EPISD is no exception. 2, students are taught to guess words based on hints or cues, not actually learn words. 3, this is called balanced literacy theory, aka cueing. 4, phonics is the old school sound out the words to learn the words that cueing replaced. 5, EPISD is not using phonics, it is using cueing. 6, there's an increasing return to phonics methodology across America in districts that awaken to the failure of cueing for their students. 7, you're at a critical decision point with this vote. A, you can shift to phonics and improve reading and reading comprehension, instruction, and results in EPISD. B, you can continue to waste money on cueing and produce semi-literate students. There are 5 bills, by the way, pending in the legislature that ban cueing this session, which could make your contract moot or the product unusable but paid for if passed. 9, I urge you to table the portion of this expenditure or the entire item and have administration explore and expand phonics. Some kids do eventually put it all together, but they don't need much instruction. According to test scores that have been terrible for decades, most don't pull it together. And those who do pull it together have parent engagement with phonics-based help or teachers who care for their kids and sneak in at their own cost phonics-based reading aids. Remember, literacy is a foundation of critical thinking. I'll close by paraphrasing the late, great George Carlin. Those in power don't want a population capable of thinking. They want obedient workers just smart enough to run the machines and just dumb enough to passively accept their situation. Thank you very much. I hope you this is a critical decision point. And I hope the lessons other districts learned are reflected in this or you adopt.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Norma de la Rosa.
Good morning, Mr. Velarde, members of the board, Messiah Vader. I'm Norma de la Rosa, president of the El Paso Teachers Association. I address you today with my concerns regarding your possible approval of curriculum materials and associated professional development to the tune of $15 million. As a career veteran teacher of English language arts from grades 1 through 8 over 40 years, I have seen programs in staff development come and go simply because it is the current trend or because the vendor knows someone personally in central office. I have seen and used many programs, many of them from some of these same vendors. Some of the programs good, some extremely bad. Many of these programs have been purchased simply because the vendor is trained to really sell the district a product based on data, and we know how data can be manipulated. But there are 2 very important points that you are obviously missing. One, in looking at the information on these programs, it is very disturbing that the materials listed were not previewed by those who should have reviewed them and determined what programs in staff development is best for our teachers and our students. Our students whose needs are much different than many students in Texas or the US. Who should have been the ones to review and make the recommendations? Our teachers, the practitioners in our classrooms who know what works and does not work with their students. They are the ones who know and modify for the many different learning styles and learning disabilities. How do we continue to allow 3 central office staff to make those kinds of decisions for our teachers to use? This is not and should not be a one-fit-all type curriculum and the materials that we use. My second concern is this. This district is known for its waste of taxpayer money when we make a mass purchase of this amount of money, yet we have nothing to show whether many of the programs, materials, and staff development have really worked. There are no metrics or rubrics in place to evaluate all these materials that have been purchased in the past. I have seen curriculum materials bought at the beginning of the year and by mid-year have been told to stop using that material and use a new one that had just been purchased. How do you know if curriculum materials that you buy are really what the vendor sold you on? You don't know because we have never really been able to use some of those programs, and you have not asked the teachers. Don't just purchase carte blanche materials and staff development because people here at central office determined it was best for our students. And how would they know if it is really what our students need if they are never in the classroom actually teaching our students? Food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Saavedra, is there anything that district wants to say regarding this purchase?
Yes, absolutely. As you know, a big part of our strategic blueprint is associated with academic excellence. A big part of that push is to overhaul our curriculum. We've been engaged over the course of the year in professional learning, professional development associated with curriculum writing. The writing of the curriculum is currently underway. Part of the curriculum writing process, as you know, a curriculum is written, taught, and tested. And so as we think about the instructional materials that need to support the delivery of the curriculum, that's what this particular agenda item is focused on. Primarily, specifically, I want to call your attention to a number of the different vendors or instructional materials that are identified that are also TEA. They've been approved by TEA and are being pushed by the commissioner in terms of high-quality instructional materials. I know that there's a report that comes out from the Department of Education at the national level, and there's a number of instructional materials that are on this list that are part of that and which we fully intend to use. In addition, I know that there was comments made about whether we are a balanced literacy district or we're moving towards a literacy framework that ascribes to the science of literacy and more specific phonics instruction, and the latter holds true. We've spent the entire year working with a design team with a cross-section of teachers and several different other job roles. We're focused on developing a literacy framework that we will adhere to that has responsibilities from the boardroom all the way to the classroom. That literacy framework is grounded in the science of reading. And so with that, we've got our Chief Academic Officer here who can provide some additional information about the process that was followed to get to the point of presenting you the materials that are before you for consideration this afternoon.
So what we started off with was the development of our instructional literacy framework. And in that process, we were able to pull together a design team that was representative of both campus and district staff. That included librarians, teachers of all core content areas, in addition to campus administrators as well as district staff. And so with that team, it was about 70 members, a little over 70 members. We really started working through the science of reading, thinking about some of those research-based practices and how they fit in connection to our literacy program for instruction, thinking about both literacy and biliteracy and how we can start to think about the research-based practices that are incorporated and what that looks like during instruction. So I think that started our process is really with collective learning, with that entire cross-section of teachers and staff. And then we moved into conversations around implementation. If we were to move forward with our instructional literacy framework, what would that look like in practice? And so a few things that came about as a part of those conversations were being able to think about a transition to instructional materials that really incorporated the science of reading. And then in addition to that, how we might begin to look at our instructional approaches in addition as it relates to our curriculum development, and then our professional development that started to support teachers around transitioning through. We've started with our reading academies, so we have for our lower grades 1,200 teachers who've completed the reading academies, and now we're transitioning into how do we operationalize that training that we've offered over the last couple of years into the actual classroom. And so we're using all of those pieces to now support the implementation in the design and the implementation of our curriculum. So as we started to have that conversation around literacy, we started to think about what are the materials that are most aligned with the science of reading, K through 8, really being able to think about how that translates into day-to-day classroom instruction. So that was really where we started to anchor our decisions coming from that design team and really informing our decisions about instructional materials for reading language arts. As we think about it for math, we started to look at some of the materials that we were already using, and in the past, we looked at multiple resources. So we had multiple resources identified for math instruction, and we started to kind of tailor that and narrow a focus so that we can provide more, a hyper focus around the practices that were most research-based. And so that started to lend itself to being able to narrow the focus around the resources that we use for math instruction. So those resources are really where we started to move for the current or the upcoming school year. For the math materials in particular, for both elementary and secondary, those materials we've been using because they were part of the materials that were provided by TEA during the pandemic and for accelerated learning. And so now we have had some opportunity to work with those materials, become familiar with them, and introduce those to teachers. What we've determined up till now is that those are the same materials that we would like to move forward with. And so we're moving from the free online materials and then proposing a movement towards the purchase materials so that we can start to strengthen our math instruction for math K through 12, so that we can think about it all the way to Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and even geometry. So those are our two primary areas around literacy and math instruction.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from members of the board? I see there be no questions from any members of the board.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Ms.
I know
Hernandez.
that Ms. Kennedy or Dr. Kennedy has been working very hard and trying to establish what's needed for our schools and I'm in support of her, or not just her, the district purchasing all that they're needing up to that amount that they said there for these items.
Thank you. Ms. Hernandez.
So I think the biggest question or the initial question I have, and maybe this may be a question for Myra. When we had the contracted services audit, I know that there was a procedure that was recommended, a business analysis on vendor contracts. Would this be applicable to that process?
Yes, there is a process to identify that the need that you considered, the district needs, and kind of what Dr. Kennedy explained about starting with how are we moving forward with our curriculum? How she explained it, it sounds like that's the process that they followed. As far as using the business case analysis form, a component of that was a needs assessment. And I know that that's really more at the superintendent level. I don't know if they did it for this particular one. What I can tell you that it is different here than in the past is that this isn't a bucket purchase. This is very specific where they're naming vendors, not necessarily vendor per amount, but it sounds like it's all tied back to the district's curriculum, but of course, Dr. Kennedy can speak more to as far as the business case analysis form.
Well, I would go through, I would just expound on what Myra shared. And specifically, again, there's specific instructional materials that are going to support the delivery of the curriculum as it's being written and designed. We went through a full procurement process so that there was no partial to any given vendor. So we followed the Edgar laws, the procurement laws. We went through a rigorous scoring, process. And although you've got an abundance of instructional materials that are listed here, there's no guarantee that we're going to use every resource that's listed. But it gives us an opportunity to use some or all of these resources as we look at specifically aligning instructional resources to the curriculum and offering additional supplemental resources for the use, for campus use, and to align with the curriculum.
And we did follow, we did go through those Edgar processes in terms of this particular RFP, knowing that we would be expending, as a part of our plan, our ESSER funds, so that we can support kind of these foundational instructional materials. And so we did go through the business analysis as a part of this RFP to really determine, coming out of those initial conversations, what exactly were our needs for instructional materials, and then how best to go about that through the RFP process. So that was included.
Thank you. My question was more audit related, just referring to the CAP and the template that was recommended by the CAP. So I guess, Ms. Martinez, I was just asking for clarification when that template that we got in the CAP should be utilized for contracts and when it shouldn't, and more of a general question and how it relates to this specifically.
And yes, that template would apply based on a certain threshold. I know you guys were talking about the threshold, but I believe it was, I don't know, you initially started at 25,000, but that seemed a little low. So I think there were conversations about increasing that threshold. But I think as Dr. Kennedy mentioned, if they did follow the Edgar requirements, those are really strict too, as far as how things can be purchased from federal funds. So that a lot of those requirements may also be a part of Edgar.
Right, so to clarify, we should be using the CAP template for all vendor contracts related to academic, contracted services and academics, with exceptions if they're using, could you just clarify?
It would just be based on a threshold. So it was, I think when we made the recommendation, it was going to be for contracts related to academic services and IT, and it would be, I'm sorry? It's not material, it's contracted services, that's correct. So it is for contracted services over 25,000, and the checkpoints would be at the procurement and at the budget process. But if this is instructional materials, then that business case analysis would not apply, I believe maybe for just the professional development piece. Mm-hmm.
However, we did do a business analysis, correct? Yes.
We did.
So
This particular RFP has goods and services that are associated, so that we're coupling the purchase of these instructional materials and ensuring that connected to that is the associated professional development. So the goods and services we followed the entire process, but for the goods and services, we would have to determine which of those would require a contract.
So Trustee Hanani, I think I can clarify this a little bit because I think I understand where your question's coming from. as at what point are we going to use that formal business analysis. So today, we're doing the RFP for the award to allow the purchase to go forward. So at the point when we make the purchase, when the district makes the purchase, that the department would fill out that formal business analysis form that you typically see and you saw as a result of that before they either do the PO or they do a contract for the services. I think that that's where you were going with your question. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that we have clarification on when the template, just because that was such a contentious audit and a very big audit and important audit for the community, that we're, as we follow up, that we're following the procedures to a T. So it was more of a clarification question and not, that was really just, when do we look for the template, is really what my question was. So kind of moving on from that, thank you, Ms. Martinez. I do want to sort of bring attention to the literacy component, and I want to sort of lift up that, the superintendent and I have had many discussions about her approach to literacy, since she was first hired. And every time we've had those discussions, it was really moving away from the Lucy Calkins approach and moving more towards what would be current research methodologies that are being promoted. As we also had those conversations in strategic planning sessions and in our HB3 sessions, we did talk a lot about phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, those elements specifically being called out for public review as we look at the assessment processes. One thing that I've always asked is that when we're looking at these curriculum materials, we're trying to get them as close to the student and as close to the teacher as possible. And so, I know this is a brand new process for you, and I'm hoping that we continue with that, going down that road of really wanting the teacher to be in charge of the assessment as much as possible, and having an approach to literacy that, the public is very informed of. So I appreciate that component of it. And I wanted to just call attention to that very quickly. The only thing that I see on here, and I mentioned it briefly before, was just the iStation was the only one that was sort of a contentious purchase before, but I understand that's being phased out.
So part of what was in this particular RFP that's a part of those recommendations is our recommendation is the transition to NWEA MAP, which would provide us with two parts, a little bit of, one, it serves as our screener that we can use across grade levels and for math and reading. And then in addition to that, it provides us data around a growth measure, which we haven't had before. The other piece is it aligns to TEKS and the curriculum, so it lets you know, based on your data, where students are in the acquisition of the curriculum. And then it also will allow us to see how students are moving towards on grade level, on target for grade level mastery. So it kind of gives us a few pieces. And so currently we are using iStation for literacy or for reading. And that will be the new assessment that we start to move towards.
And NWEA MAPS also has a robust Spanish option.
That's correct.
Which has not been something that we've been able to rely on in the past.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that these conversations we had at length when we did our HB3 planning. The idea is to move away from just one high stakes test that's given in Texas and have nationally norm reference tests that can actually be used as a benchmarks to help teachers teach in the classroom. So I appreciate that there was a lot of strategic alignment that way. And that's it. That concludes questions for me.
Thank you. Any other questions from any other board members?
I have questions.
Dr. Escobar.
So, well, one, I think when we're doing something like this, it would really help me if we had like an actual presentation so I could visually see what's happening. I went through the whole backup and I was still left with a lot of questions. Like, I'm not completely understanding what this is going to look like in the classroom. And that's like, I guess, my first question, just because some of what was said in public comment, I think we see our schools over the past years prior to you getting here, and this is nothing on your end, but I think one of the bigger questions is the past administration would come in and give us something, and then a few months later, they would pull it and then bring something else in. And so I think really responding to how we're going to do this, I know we're creating a new curriculum that wasn't in existence, and so I'm just wondering how will teachers know that this is going to be this moving forward? And how are we going to evaluate to make sure that this is actually working? Because I feel like that's a component that is left out quite a bit throughout what we're doing. So I guess that's kind of my first statement question, and then I have a few more things.
I think, so a couple of things. First of all, I would share with you that in terms of how we're going to work with teachers, we've got a whole professional development plan that we're working with our Executive Director of Professional Learning to roll out over the course of the summer and through all of our professional learning days. So teachers are going to be trained to use not necessarily just the instructional materials, but more importantly, here's the curriculum. Here's how you use the curriculum to develop a robust lesson. And here are the resources that are going to support your instructional delivery. So we've got to have a place to start. And the place to start is with the purchase of instructional materials. That's number one. And we have a robust professional learning plan that will align to the rollout of the use of the new curriculum. In terms of how will we evaluate, that's a lot of the information that we'll be reporting up to the board in terms of our House Bill 3 student outcome goals. Because it's not any given one material, it's the use of the curriculum, the instructional delivery approach, and all of the resources that we've used to align the curriculum will be reporting out to the board. This is how our student achievement outcomes are going. At the beginning of the year, here's what we know about literacy and math. In the middle of the year, here's how much growth students have experienced. At the end of the year, here's where we landed. We have this many kindergartners who are reading on grade level, so forth and so on. So we've got an entire calendar that's aligned to our House Bill 3 student outcome goals that will provide the board with information about how these resources, together with the curriculum, the professional development, and the Tier 1 instruction happening in classrooms every day, is helping us to meet our student outcomes.
One really quick follow-up question to that. I know at some point we had started a process, I think this was, a year and a half ago, where I had asked if we could survey the teachers on how effective they felt these instructional materials were for them and their students. I think at some point we saw some survey results from that. I'm not sure if that's part of the process, but just kind of in line with his line of questioning, I think we need to be vocal about making sure that teachers are part of that assessment framework and that there's an understanding, because that's really where we get a lot of pushback, is teachers are saying this doesn't work, or the district's changing things on us several times a year. And I understand that's not the goal, and that's obviously not the plan. But just to have those benchmarks from teachers is always really helpful to, for transparency purposes.
For sure. And I think I would add that we do have a plan. So this is kind of step one, as Ms. Saavedra mentioned, is just to have the materials approved and for us to get started. The next piece of it does have multiple layers for teachers to be involved, including campus support staff and principals and assistant principals. So that will start as we move forward based on this recommendation today. And so we have a learning progression that we're already considering, starting with the summer, and then how that will start to progress over time into the school year and throughout the school year with different touch points. What we're using to monitor, if you think about what's already in the strategic blueprint for academic achievement, that 2.1.1 is around a walkthrough form. So one of the ways that we're looking at, in addition to monitoring data as we go, is the use of the curriculum so that we can start to gauge, are we starting to see that uptick in our data based on implementation in the classroom? And so the two are very connected. And so we'll be looking at data along the way and having conversations with campus staff, including our principals, but teachers as well, around the data, and then starting to look at what that implementation looks like and where we're seeing trends across the system so that we can start to discern whether or not there's high fidelity of implementation of the curriculum itself in addition to the resources. So the curriculum, these resources are just part of the curriculum, but they are a major part of the curriculum. And so we'll be looking at both of those pieces.
I would also add just one more comment, that embedded in our curriculum will be a feedback form for teachers to provide us feedback as
That's
they engage in each one of their units. They'll have an opportunity to provide us feedback on the utilization, how the curriculum was laid out, you know, the use of the instructional resources. So there's multiple ways where teacher voice is being considered as we work through this process.
Correct.
Okay, before I go back to Dr. Acevedo, I'm going to ask the board to please follow board decorum. Dr. Acevedo has the floor right now. I want to avoid board members going back and forth and getting engaged in this open line of questioning. Also, Dr. Acevedo, I just want to remind you, we have a budget meeting that is already scheduled for 12 o'clock, and we're at 12:14 right now. So if you'll ask your line of questioning in a manner that we can get the answers that you need and sufficient information for us to do a vote. Thank you. Dr. Acevedo.
Yeah, so I think I appreciate everything you just said, and I think as we're going out into doing this, saying to teachers, we know in the past this has happened, and we are going to be intentional about professional development. We're not going to give you this and then change it up in 6 months. I think that is really important for buy-in, right? I think back on Renaissance when that audit came through, and a lot of those licenses were not being used, and I think the utilization rate is going to help in terms of making sure that this is being implemented with fidelity. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and the buy-in from the teachers is just so important because they're like, I don't want to dive into all of this and then you take it away. So just have that in mind as we're going through the whole thing. And I guess the last thing that I had is you mentioned that this is really aligned with TEA and the commissioner and stuff. So that kind of worries me a bit in terms of what the curriculum is, because prior to your arrival, the curriculum at EPISD was very much TEKS. So I'm thinking, is this just more TEKS, or are we gonna really do something great with it? And yeah, because that gave me kind of like a red flag when you mentioned that.
Right, well, I mean, what we all need to know is that there is a bill that's going before the legislature, that's the High Quality Instructional Materials Bill. And so we've vetted several of the instructional materials that are part of that bill. And some of them you're going to see on this list because they do align with the direction that we're going in terms of, you know, amplify, Eureka Math, you know, things of that nature. So I understand that, you know, our philosophy hasn't always aligned with what's coming from the state. In this particular case, it does. So
I do think, in addition to that, is this is all aligned to a level of review that is nationwide. And so while it is in alignment with TEA recommended materials, they are also aligned to a set of national standards around instructional materials that are vetted through ed reports.
Any other questions?
One quick comment here.
Yes, sir.
All right, thanks everybody for being patient with me with my baby here today. Her mom's out of town, so I thought I'd remind everybody why we do what we do here, so. Anyway, as far as this particular agenda item goes, I'm not a curriculum expert, and so you know, I hear some of the concerns that folks have, but unless, as a non-curriculum expert, I don't see any compelling reason to not approve any of these items. I know that our district in the past has had some definite challenges in this area. And with our new administration, I hope that we keep this process as clean as possible. So unless I, hear or know of anything otherwise, I'm going to be in favor of this.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a motion.
Move to approve.
We have a motion to approve, a second.
Second.
We have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 6-0. That brings us to our adjournment of the special meeting of 11:30. We will reconvene in about 10 minutes to do our budget meeting. Thank you.